Biodiversity up first.
Okay, we're live now. So, welcome to the Data and Information Committee, first one of these committees, and it's your terms of reference, but it's I reckon it's really exciting, and it's going to be a wonderful way of just my mic.
Sorry, just for the. And if I could apologise for having to leave shortly.
Okay, I'm just going to leave shortly. And welcome to the Data and Information Committee, first one of these committees, first meeting of this committee, and looking forward to receiving all sorts of information that we can use. And we've had a taste of that today. No decisions are made at this committee. It is simply to receive information. And slightly differently from the agenda, we're going to start with 7.2, an update on the biodiversity mapping project. As Rachel Brown.
Happy to move the amendment to the agenda. Happy to second it?
We don't have to, but thank you anyway.
Sorry.
Is there anything else we do have to do? Are there any apologies? Only Hillary's, Councillor Laws and Hillary for needing to leave early. Anything else?
Happy to move that.
Okay, so we'll have those two, Wilson and Hope. Move. And anything else we need to do? Conflicts of interest, anyone? No, impossible, is it? Because it's a receiving committee, not a deciding one. So welcome to Rachel, Senior Policy Analyst, who's going to take us through the update on the biodiversity mapping project. Over to you. Welcome to you too, Gwen.
Well, this paper just provides an update on the biodiversity mapping and ecological prioritisation project. So this is Action 3.1 in ORC's Biodiversity Action Plan, provides a fundamental piece of information that will underpin work going forward, both in the regulatory and the non-regulatory space. So there were two key phases to the project. The first was mapping by wildlands. So they mapped potential ecosystems, current ecosystems, and habitats of significant fauna. The second phase, which is nearing completion, was ecological prioritisation, which is to be completed by the end of this month. And then we're currently looking at how we can share that information more widely and what parts of it and with whom.
Thank you. Have you got anything to add, Gwyneth? Or all good? So we're open for questions, taking the report as read. Anybody have any questions? Okay, well, we're asked to note this report. Councillor Malcolm.
I just thought usually there's heaps, but just on next steps, and that's paragraph 28 on page 39. So we go convene a hui with Ranaka and determine how the priorities identified along with the iwi, hapu, whānau and the like. So at what stage does the rest of Otago get to put their comments and thoughts around that, the priorities that we decide on align with their priorities?
So this is a prioritisation exercise that Rachel referred to is around ecological prioritisation. It is not around the prioritisation of what any action that we might take as a base on the decision of this information. It's just around what the experts are saying is the ecological priorities. We need to talk to Ranaka to understand from their perspective the cultural overlay and biodiversity values that they have as well. Once we have a complete, this paper is presenting a mapping exercise and prioritisation of ecological prioritisation. Once we have the complete set of information, then we can move on to the next phase, which will be around how do we use this information for various decision-making exercises, right? They could be everything from policy through to mitigation and restoration through to a whole lot of things, but we need to make sure we have the right information to be making best decisions with.
Are you saying experts prioritise it?
Experts are providing through this prioritisation process, the ecological prioritisation, yes.
So we're not deciding on it.
I think what Gwyneth's saying, if I can help, is that you will in time, make decisions on the actions we will take as a consequence of the mapping and the ecological priorities that come from that.
Councillor Hobbs?
Yeah. So an ecological priority is almost a statement of fact. There are, what do you call those things, dragons, no, lizards, baby dragons, all along that area. That is an ecological priority. It's not, we're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
It's there. Is that, have I got that right?
Yes.
Yeah. The fact that it's there.
So what we get to do something about is how we act on those priorities.
That's
It's not up to us to make the priorities. Does that answer your question, Councillor Calvert?
It's a strange use of the word prioritise. I
Yes, it
haven't
is a wee bit.
struck that before. I can see why, to say these things are important, I can see that comes out of real data, but to say there is a priority of them seems to me a decision's being made, not a strict data thing. So it's a whole new use of a word to me.
Thanks. Let's go to Rachel. Maybe explain this.
That's just to reflect the process we went through, which is
Which John Leithwick went through. So I think you said earlier you didn't like the word of the name zonation, which is the computer software. So this is actually
in this paper.
Yeah, but ecological prioritisation is actually what that software does. So that was just sort of saying what it does.
It's a process.
Yeah.
It's a process, not a decision.
So I think, a way you could think of it is that it's technical prioritisation.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do it because I don't have the technical background. So we need specialists to do that for us, and then based on the information that we get, we can then come to you to say what action would you like to take.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Robertson, then Scott.
Yeah, I just really wanted to say thanks for all the work that's gone on this project. It's been huge and ongoing to get to those prioritisations, which I think if we are communicating with community into the future, we should probably call them something else like importance or, just because the software spits it out as priorities. I think that is probably confusing, and in an area where landholders and rest of Otago feels a real sense of ownership in the space. I think everyone does, so that's an important point. But more importantly, it's so great to have this information. We're on a back foot in Otago, not having had the info, not having invested heavily in biodiversity. And we've heard from the people doing this project that actually we're the first council in New Zealand to have done this mapping. So we're actually now ahead of the game, and how we choose to use the information and react will be certainly something that we need to really think about, and how are we going to invest through the LTP, probably ahead of some of the real finer detail that'll come out through working to all the stakeholders to signal at least that we do plan to invest in biodiversity and what that might look like. Hear what you're saying as well. Community need to be involved in prioritising what they feel needs to be invested in across Otago, and whether that's through planning. One of those will be the land and water plan, how that looks, but another will be our responsibilities through the biodiversity legislation, I suppose, that regional councils need to enact. But we're in an amazing position now, fantastic. I think it took 15 days to run the river modelling alone. It's a massive, massive undertaking. So just a huge thanks, and we look forward to utilising the models. Thanks.
Councillor Scott?
Yeah, just endorse what Councillor Robinson has just said, so thank you. I think the key thing from my perspective is that, we're all excited that this council is actually deciding to do some stuff in biodiversity, whereas for years it was always a little bit too hard. And here we are, the timing moving into the LTP. From my perspective, I'd love to see, you know, one or two options or two or three options in terms of programs going forward, in terms so we can determine the expenditure and so forth. I'm looking forward to doing some outcomes. I don't see, you know, this mapping is obviously facilitated, but it's in terms of actual biodiversity, environmental outcomes, we're still not there. So, you know, I'd love to see in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, how we can build upon this, and, you know, some program options. So we've got, for example, in here, next steps, we're dealing with Runaka, and somebody's asked, well, how about the rest of the community? What about this council? And how does that feed into potential projects? What's the timeline? Boom, boom, boom. I'm understating the obvious.
Are you thinking there that we kind of need a map of all the things that this biodiversity plan might impact? All the decisions that we
Well, all I'm saying is we just need some options and some plans going forward that actually have outcomes at the end of them. And, you know, so what are our priorities? And, for example, Gretchen, you know, said over a cup of tea, you know, is our immediate priority to look after the existing areas, you know, that need treasuring? Or is it actually to do other things in parallel to that? You know, so what's our vision? What's our program? Are we going to actually, where do we want to be at the end of this LTP? You know, so I'm just hoping, because this council, you know, for years, you know, would do something like this and put it on the shelf and then move on to the next challenge. I'm hoping that this will be a real catalyst for action.
Can I help?
Thank you.
Absolutely hearing you. I think paragraph 22 in the paper gives you a bunch of information about how we might use this. So yes, there's potentially a package of things that we could come up with that are specifically, we're going to do X, Y, and Z for biodiversity. But I see it as a broader application than that. So, for example, you know, our consent staff, when they're looking at an application, this is another layer of information that they can pull up and understand in terms of looking at the relationships between what was there and what is there currently, and whether or not in the future these are a biodiversity, what a better word, priority, where we might want to build in some preservation or you know, a bunch of measures that could be used. Also, when we are creating policy, for example, again, you refer to the mapping and understanding that gives us of the region, just another set of context, and that will also inform the way we think about the region and the way that we think about land use and other things. So I see it as being something that we can use fairly quickly without having necessarily an action plan, but then also in time developing up an action plan with very specific actions that would deal with biodiversity to generate some biodiversity outcomes. So I think it's a tool with multiple uses that we're not restricted in using by waiting to have that bunch of actions.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Councillor Malcolm, who hadn't finished his question before, and then we'll go to Councillor Hobbs.
Yeah, but I think we're really on the right step. I'm very, very happy with it, but it's just that word prioritisation is a whole heap prioritised by a mapping group that we've hired, and look, I think that what they've done is tremendous. We're also giving priority and determination around Runaka, but we actually don't say that, you know, there may be things out there that we actually so then we're going back out with this list of species or whatever, but we actually haven't consulted with everyone else in public general to say, well, what do you prioritise? And that's the part that it just doesn't quite add up to me, because we will be, and I think the tools going back to 22, I think they're absolutely spot on, but we're actually then using it using those tools to spend money that we actually haven't consulted on with the rest of Otago.
Do you have a comment on that, Gwyneth, Rachel? On that?
Maybe we'll do a double barrel go at it.
Yeah.
So I just want to emphasise that this is a presentation of a project that was to do biodiversity mapping. It is not a presentation of what we plan to do with all this information, okay? This is a starting point, as Sarah said. It is a foundation piece of information from which we could do a number of things. We use technical experts to advise us on flora and fauna, right? That does not mean that we will not go out to various stakeholders across the community when we start talking about what we want to do with this information. We might use it through our FMU processes in the land and water plan, as Sarah said. We might use it, there's all sorts of ways we can use it. It's not so, don't think that because we have the information that doesn't mean we're not going to use it when we engage in a number of programs and projects across council. Does that help answer your question, Kelvin? Yeah, it's just information.
I'm trying to help, but I think if you're envisaging a package of work that specifically looks at biodiversity, and remembering we have a biodiversity strategy, we have a biodiversity action plan, but we've actually done very little in biodiversity, and Rachel's been almost the lone person who's been trying to do this work. We now have Ewan who's going to be assisting, which is fantastic. We can get to a point where we have a suite of things that would come to you just as any other program of work comes to you, where we might say, look, we think we should be doing this. And if it's of a significant enough scale, then we can consult through an annual plan process or an LTP process. I'm not committing to the LTP process because I'm not sure with the time that we have we can necessarily build something for them. I think that's a bit ambitious, but of course, you know, we can have an annual plan process in year 2 or 3 where we do build some further actions in and consult the public on it. So I think there's opportunities both ways.
Can I give you maybe try and do a analogy? We don't come and ask you whether or not you think the water quality sample we took in a particular river was the water quality sample and whether or not, so we just get the information. This is an exercise in getting the information to inform decision making.
We'll talk about that.
Does that make sense? Yeah. It's factual information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hobbs.
Just rounding this up because I'm going back to paragraph 22 and I'm going to try and give an example of how we use that information. And it's quite broad. So one of the first ones is in catchment planning. So I would imagine that some of us, the person who's probably on the catchment advisory group or on the catchment group working with them, and people are talking about putting in a wetland and doing some work on that. This is a tool that we'd use to have a look around to see what other things can be linked up and what are consequences. Here's a second one. You do the spatial analysis, who we need to collaborate with on actions. A lot of our land is dockland. I've heard that so much from the farmers around here. So much such as dockland, or it's government land, or it's railway land. So we find out who it is. We need to do something about biodiversity. We've identified the partners that we need to talk with. You've got another one about, and this is where that man, I can't remember his name. Gavin. Sorry, Gavin. It's all right. The management of Indigenous biodiversity in terms of climate change. So we're looking, what did we hear out of that? You scared me witless the other day when you said that the sea was coming in 10 metres, I'm sure you said that, a year. What was that, at the mouth of the Clutha?
Yep.
That did me in for some days. I was almost speechless. It was a very high achievement. But having done that, I mean, then we need to know from here what is affected by that, what's affected out there on the kelp forests, etc. So, and then there's another thing that you look after, and that's weed distribution. When you send people in down rivers to take out various weeds, we're going to be able to know now which are the most important weeds to focus on to get rid of. So I do, sorry if I've been long-winded, but I've heard all the arguments. This is a tool. We have a biodiversity strategy. We have an action plan. This is a tool that helps that.
It can inform every part of our decision.
Absolutely, in a whole lot of ways.
Well, thank you.
So am I right in saying we haven't prioritised these items, we've just collected a database?
Yeah.
So all I'm saying, that's where you're going to get the reaction from
With the word priority.
Joe Public is saying someone else has been given all this opportunity to prioritise my ecological systems, but I haven't been given any. No problem for letting anyone go out there and form a database of it. That's what happens in the marketplace. That's what's going to create the issues.
I think it's a really good point, because, and that's one of the reasons why we're not publishing the information straight away.
Yep.
So obviously, one potential use of the information is that it prioritises areas that can be ground truthed, and I think the discussions with landowners are critical, and other councils have had those discussions with landowners before they've published the information, for example, and they've prioritised retaining what's there. In terms of I think that's a step, but we just haven't really worked that far forward yet as to how that's going to play out.
Presumably we also prioritise where we collect water samples from, for example.
Yes, we do.
Using that analogy. These are factual prioritisations. Anyway, so we'll move on from there. I think we've got that.
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment too, please?
Yep.
Finger up for a while.
I've got Noon and then...
Oh, sorry, you were already...
Yeah. Councillor Noon.
Look, mine's along a similar vein,
And then
but this is where I've got with this particular paper, is that there's been an ecological assessment, I won't even use the P word, assessment done, and it's not quite complete, because we've got to have a conversation with the Runaka, who will have their own expert witnesses, who will speak to our expert witnesses, whether it's within the organisation or a consultant. They will then essentially agree on the ecological assessment. The next step follows that in terms of an action plan, but until we complete the ecological assessment, we don't actually fully understand what we've got, and then we can't make the next step until we actually finish the first step. Am I right? Okay, cool.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, I think just for me, the missing step is it coming back into council midway through here for us to understand what priorities were arrived at before it is published. And that's missing. So I don't accept that it's similar to just measuring a water sample, because water samples are measured all the time and they come back to us, or that they don't come back to us. I think this is different. So I believe there should be a step in here about when those priorities are arrived at between iwi's experts and ours, that it is brought back to us.
That seems like a dangerous position to me, but I'd like to hear Gwyneth's view on that.
All we will be doing is representing technical advice to you. That's what we will do. We can come back once we've got the input from Runaka, but we will just be presenting the same technical advice to you about where the ecological values and priorities are.
Yeah, enough said. Thank you. I think I'm sure everyone will take those comments on board. Is anybody willing to put this, the motion that we accept this report?
Yep, I will.
So we've got Gretchen and Marion. Thank you. And Marion. And all in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against.
Carried.
Thank you, and thank you very much,
Thanks, people.
Rachel and Gwyneth. A fantastic project. Awesome to see it moving ahead. We now come to 7.1, update on the geology and ground
Bloody
conditions
hell. This did me in.
of South Dunedin and Harbourside. So this is Sharon Hornblow and John Luke and Gavin.
Do people deliberately set out about ruining my evenings as a result of reading things like this? That wasn't that bad, actually, was it? It was not as bad as... Yeah. Not as bad as I had thought.
Welcome to the table, history, and it was quite a sobering report. Have you got anything to add? Anything you'd like to say or explain?
Yeah, just I wanted to give a summary of where this data sits in compared to the overall program of work that we started about 15 years ago. Just to give you a bit of context, it's a very quick summary, 1 minute. 2004, we started to monitor sea level in just in Green Island, just on that island of the South Dunedin coast, and that's really focusing on sea level, but also we are monitoring also ground level on the island to see how this is moving in relation to sea level. In 2009, we've really started to look into the groundwater and the geology of the area by installing monitoring bores. We've put 4 of them in the South Dunedin area, and that gathers the first information about groundwater in the area. And we started working with that and doing some estimation of groundwater trends in the future. Jumping back in time, in 2018, 2019, we've put even more focus on the groundwater and the geology of the area by increasing the monitoring network of groundwater, but also the better understanding of ground conditions. So we've increased the monitoring network from 4 bores, I think, to 22. So that's give us much more a better definition of what's happening in the Dunedin area, but we've also extended the study area to another low-lying area around Harbourside, between basically the stadium and the Oval, recognizing that this area is critical for the city and may have the same issues as South Dunedin. Why we've done all that, it's basically one of the purpose of the work the ORC is doing in the area is to better understand the environment, the physical environment in South Dunedin and Harbourside, and how natural hazards are interacting in that environment. The idea is to understand what is happening now, but also in the future, in 50 years' time, 100-year time, to be able to guide those decisions around the future of those areas, low-lying areas along the coast. The report today is also highlighting the fact that we hear a lot about South Dunedin in terms of sea level rise, climate change, but there are other hazards there that are not directly linked with climate change, but we need to consider. So the approach we're taking since the beginning is a multi-hazard approach, looking to water-related hazard, groundwater rise, sea level effect on that, stormwater, but also the geology and ground condition. And that's what really the new information, the data that we have is about. It's just giving us a better understanding of that aspect.
Thank you. Shall we start with questions? Councillor Hobbs, then Noon.
It's just picking up on that last thing you said. This is not about high seawater, low groundwater with sandhills in between. This is actually the seismic stuff and liquefaction.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So it's only one part of the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Just want to clarify.
Councillor Moon.
Thanks, Madam Chair. The question I've got, John Luke, is around with the additional information that you've been able to collate, what does that do or look like to a TA, and in this case Dunedin City, implementing their district plan and their residential section of their district plan, i.e. South Dunedin, the pressure of greater intensification for residential activity, for example? What does this additional information do to guide the Dunedin City Council in that residential space in South Dunedin?
So the new information basically could help the city in deciding about building conditions, building consents. One of the recommendations is to provide this information to the city for them to use in the building consent process to guide really design of buildings around ground conditions. But also this information can be used for district plan to inform what is a relevant zoning for this area.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, sorry, who's next? Deacon.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, congratulations on this report. I found it fascinating, detailed, interesting, and I'm sure it was very expensive. I think it's money well spent, though. It seems, if I've read this correctly, that the risk of liquefaction is one that we shouldn't get too exercised about, although it's not entirely absent. But it's very good to know that as a result of all this groundwork, liquefaction is not a serious threat to the people and their investments in South Dunedin. My first question is related to figure 5, which shows the substructure contours, and it's just a question based on curiosity. The feature running from the harbour down to the beach at St Kilda looks remarkably like an old river valley. Mm-hmm. Would I be right in thinking that?
Yes, I can speak about that. That's the tracing of where the proto-leith, as we might call it, would have run from in the harbour area through South Dunedin and then out to sea back when sea level was about 120 metres lower than it is today. Yeah, so that's that was a interesting finding because previously GNS and all the best geotechnical data we had placed that channel over to the side a bit, and we've found out a lot about the different depths of sediment and where the previous channel used to lie. Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon. Finally, Madam Chair, in terms of natural hazards for South Dunedin, it seems the one unanswered question to me is the duneland from St Kilda right through to St Clair. We know that at St Clair it is fragile because DCC has to spend a great deal of time and money on reinforcing those dunes. But it seems to me in terms of both sea level rise and tsunami risk that we have an almost unspoken faith that the existence of those dunes has protective value for the people who live in South Dunedin. And yet, as far as I know, and I could be quite wrong here, we actually haven't done any work on those dunes to find out whether they are indeed a redoubtable barrier to invasion by the sea, either by storms or by tsunamis or by the gradual incursion of sea level rise. What is our level of knowledge about, say, the dunes between Chisholm Park Golf Course and the ocean? We know that behind there are areas which are below sea level. But the existence of the dunes gives people a visual and physical feeling of security. How secure are they?
Do you have any answers for that?
I'll just, a brief answer to that is the coastal scientist at Dunedin City Council is leading a process where they've engaged consultants to do a full assessment of storm surge, sea level rise and just the risk of erosion to those dunes as part of a dynamic adaptive pathway approach to Dunedin's management of those dunes over time. Because as you highlight, they are essential as a tsunami and storm surge barrier, and Dunedin City Council have assets that need protecting, obviously, and so we're making sure we're keeping up to date with them through that process, but that is currently led by DCC.
Thank you, that's really reassuring. Thanks, Sharon, again. Very good, that's me.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Thanks. Yeah, the questions around at a staff and technical level, how much ongoing interaction do we have with the DCC on bringing all the hazards information together? and jointly shaping up, I suppose, those types of initiatives that we just talked about. So yeah, that's the question, and then for us to think then about our recommendations and the so what as a result of this paper. Thanks.
So we've been working closely with the city on technical aspect. We have set up a technical advisory group with the purpose of discussing alignment in terms of monitoring, but also making sure we've got a forum to share information, this kind of information, or information on groundwater or any technical information. The other thing this group is tasked to do is making sure if we undertake modeling, for example, we undertake it in a way that serve both council objectives. For example, the one key aspect in South Dunedin is the interaction between the different components of the water cycle. So how the runoff interact with groundwater, how groundwater interact with the sea level, but also how groundwater interact with the artificial features such as the stormwater and the wastewater system. So that's, in terms of roles and responsibilities, it's really overlapping shared roles and responsibilities. DCC is mainly, managing the infrastructure, ORC provide information around groundwater and the natural environment. So we've got those links established on a technical at the technical level to be able to do that, recognizing that it is quite critical in South Dunedin because of the overall, the shared responsibility, the complexity of the environment, and also the fact that it's not only ORC and DCC doing work there that can be useful for decision making, but we also have Crown Research Institute, GNS, NIWA interested, we've got universities. So it's really trying to coordinate also at that level, not only city and regional council, but from a research perspective too.
Thank you, Dr. Fauna.
Probably just add that it's timely to think about the alignment between DCC's interests and our own. There are two matters that we need to probably reflect on. You'll see the papers referred to as South Dunedin and Harbourside. So the geographic extent of our work includes all of the low-lying land in Dunedin urban area, whereas the South Dunedin initiative that Dr. Payana's talked about is focused exclusively around what we call South Dunedin. And the second issue, as you can see from this paper, is we're thinking multi-hazard, not just climate and the water cycle, but it's geology and geotechnical conditions. And the project Dr. Payana's talked about doesn't expressly include the geotechnical issues that you're considering at the moment. So I think it's timely to think about those matters, and you'll see that at paragraph 38, we're bringing a paper back on the collaborative initiative and the role RRC should play in adaptation for South Dunedin and Harbourside, given all of the issues.
Right. Thank you. So I've got Councillor Hope, then Councillor Scott, and then Wilson. Do you want to say something? Okay, Councillor Hope.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the report. There's some very, very good visuals there, and I appreciate that. I just have a question to ask you, which is, I'm right, aren't I, from what you said, 2004, you started with 4 bores and now we're up to 22. Is there anything different from those 4 bores now to the 22 that collect data that wasn't being collected, say, in 2004? Have we got much of a difference in our...
I'll just speak generally. The 4 bores were initially installed over a decade ago as part of a project to analyse the changes to groundwater, looking forward to sea level rise in the future. That project has evolved beyond just wanting to look at groundwater level to also looking at things like interaction with the seawater with the groundwater as well. So we have in the newer bores, some of them are measuring salinity, they're all measuring temperature as well, and that's allowed for quite a wealth of information which is publicly available, and GNS has recently used it to report on our recent improved understanding on the groundwater conditions. So, for example, we have an understanding of the extent to which the seawater freshwater interface extends into South Dunedin, as well as, now that we have a wider network, being able to carry out tests to test transmissivity and other properties of the ground to improve our next generation groundwater model.
Thank you, Dr. Hornblower.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, no, thank you. I read this report too quickly, and then at the end of it you think, well, what did I actually read? And so I'm just after a bit of help, and I apologise. But I have read in there, for example, 21, where it says the report considers that settlement of up to 100 millimetres may occur in some areas without being considered severe. So as Councillor Decker says, it's maybe not that bad, particularly when you compare it with Christchurch. But then you say, for example, however, complex flood-related and infrastructural issues can still result from such settlements. And then you say later on that, okay, there's a lack of liquefaction susceptibility, but does not preclude poor ground conditions being present. And then I tried to understand the mapping with the different coloured dots and so forth, and the 1 in 100. Just, can you just sort of help me? So we're saying, as Councillor Decker said, that liquefaction shouldn't be a huge issue. Is that what we're saying? Or can you help me through one of these maps to give me a little bit more clarity?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I think it's always going to be a matter of perspective and context.
Yeah.
If you had 100 millimetres of differential settlement in your house, you'd be pretty upset.
Yeah.
It's not a life safety issue.
Yeah.
You can reconstruct and rebuild. Okay, so I think we just need to carefully look at the information.
Yeah.
It is true, it is not on the current information and given current methods and the like, Canterbury kind of effects. But that's not to say that these aren't things that are problematic to individuals and to property.
Yeah.
So, and again, in the report, qualifiers around lateral spreading and other things that go with seismic events which are not assessed here. So it's true, it's better than we previously thought, but there are still issues. They are manageable issues, but there are still issues that need to be carefully managed.
Yeah, so it all goes in, and it could be existing design changes and future design changes. Okay, and can I just follow that up with a subsequent question? Thank you, Madam Chair. A different question is now, aside from the liquefaction, we're talking South Dunedin and the harbour side. I've noticed that in the last two presentations. And whereas in fact, what is the from a sea level, what is the elevation change between, say, the harbour side around the stadium compared to one of the football fields in South Dunedin? It must be reasonably significant, I would have thought. Would it be 2 metres?
Yes, so the reclaimed land, this is what we may move to referring to the area as reclaimed Dunedin, sort of as an educational aid, because around the harbour side from the stadium through to South Dunedin, there is a significant part of the city that is reclaimed.
Yeah.
We count most of South Dunedin also as reclaimed land because it is, in some instances, a drained wetland that's been infilled. South Dunedin continues to be, will always have the lowest lying land in central Dunedin.
Yeah.
The reclaimed land in the last 100 years tends to be built up to an elevation around 2 metres above sea level, whereas the lowest parts of South Dunedin are about 1 metre above sea level. So there is a significant difference.
Okay, a metre.
Yeah, so
roughly.
Generally speaking, yes. And just also to add to
that. So it was a metre, and we're allowing for a metre change in sea level rise for 100 years. Does it actually make sense to actually group them together if there's such a significant difference? One's, they might have two separate strategies might be required. That's the question.
They might. The response, interventions, whatever, should be issue and place specific.
Yeah.
But it occurred to us several years ago that we were very focused on South Dunedin, and we asked ourselves the question, why would you exclude the rest of Dunedin, the reclaimed part, which is reclaimed and also very low lying. And that's why, as part of this program, we have extended it.
Yeah.
There are issues that will need to be thought through there, although the responses might be different.
Yeah, and sea level rise is just one of them, as you pointed out in this report. Yeah.
Yeah, so that the area, say the Edgar Centre kind of area, very similar behaviourally, liquefaction risk and elevation to the rest of the harbourside area.
Yeah.
So there's that reclaimed land that's man-made, which should all be grouped together.
And if I can add also.
From criticality for the city, that harbourside section between the stadium and the Oval roughly got heavily used for industrial, commercial activities. It got major infrastructure, and future one, the hospital, the new hospital, state highways. So in able to recognize that, we thought, only focusing on South Dunedin is...
No, it's good. I'm just trying to understand it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Deaker?
Yeah, sorry to have a second go. Brian, you just reminded me. I spent several years working in John Wycliffe House across the exchange there. And every time I came out the door, there was a plaque on the footpath which said, "This is the beach where the settlers pulled up in their boats." Mm-hmm. And I used to sit there, I used to look at it and say, bloody hell, big earthquake, this building falls over. Because it's sitting on a beach. Now, all this work, was I right or wrong? Yeah, you put a building, you put a structure of that mass on beach sand with rising sea level and the risk of liquefaction, albeit less than we thought it would be. What is the risk for big structures? And not South Dunedin, where it's basically wooden cottages and a few supermarkets, but...
Are you feeling any safer in this building?
Is this getting a bit away from where we should be?
Because this is not the beach.
I'll just add, what is in this report is that the definition of good ground in the building code, it considers seismic risk, but it also has other factors such as the plasticity, the ability for ground to bear loads. And so this is only considering the seismic settlement that would occur under shaking. It doesn't go into complexities around how the soil behaves when you have a 4-storey building on it.
Or an 8-storey building.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's kind of getting away from...
That requires, site-specific investigation, which we still recommend as being essential for any development.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer.
All good, okay. Yeah. Thank you. We've got to receive the report, note the current state of the knowledge, to make the, number 3 was to make the information publicly available through the National Geotechnical Database and ORC's Otago Natural Hazards Database, and to provide the information to the Dunedin City Council for incorporation into building control, utility infrastructure and land use planning decisions. Moved Councillor Hobbs, seconded Councillor Hope. It'll be quicker. Thank you. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, carried. Thank you very much, team. It's a great report, and I'm sure it's going to be useful when DCC's considering Councillor Deaker's concerns. State of the Environment Statistics Building Report Card, item 7.3. And we welcome to the table Rachel Ozan and Gwyneth back again. And the purpose of this is to assess the compliance of Otago's water quality with regional plans, Water for Otago plan and numerical standards. Welcome, and do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So this is an annual report card, so these come out every year. And actually, I think this is the first time it's ever been presented to council. Usually it's just put on the website. So if you go to the website, you'll find the last 15 years of report cards sitting there. And it is purely to report on the Schedule 15 parameters of the water plan. So it's a report looking at 5 years of water quality data, and it's a 5-year 80th percentile below median flow, and that's what the water plan says. And the water plan groups all the sites into Otago into 5 groups. There's 2 lake groups and 3 water groups. So you'll see the tables in the report reflect those groupings, and they all have slightly different limits and targets to meet. So it's fairly simple. Apart from the not simple bit is that the version that you have, the colours don't match the map. So where it's yellow, it should be dark green on the table in the front. So this table here, the yellow bit, disregard that. And you'll see on the version on our website that it is the correct version. So everything else is fine, it's just the colours.
Questions? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah.
Just on that, so if I look at the map, it goes excellent, fair, good, poor. Shouldn't it go from excellent to good to fair to poor?
Well, it could do.
Well, that is the-
Yes.
The spectrum.
Yeah, and it explains that in the front. It tells you what's what, so that's fine. So you're just saying the order of the groups are. Yeah.
Well, what it made me think was actually that the fair and the good words have been put in the wrong place rather than the dots, and that's what I'm just checking.
Well, the colours relate to the groups, so it doesn't really matter what order they're in. I see your point though.
No, it does, because good was green,
confused.
and if good was the dark green, then it's just the words that are wrong, not the colours so much.
It was only the colours which were wrong. So
the light green should be yellow.
No, absolutely not. So the map here, we have got excellent, which is blue, and then we have fair, which is dark green, and then we have good, which is light green, and then we have poor, which is red. That is the way that it works.
Yeah, it's confusing.
So that's okay. So I think we're clear on that.
Thank you.
And so I've got, Wilson, you've, and Councillor Wilson, another question, and then Councillor
If I
Scott.
compare this to the previous year, because I think it's really helpful to, and see the trending, and that's the only way we can see that. If I look in the Waitaki, there was a number, you've got 3 on this one. There was one to the east of that, which was 119 that has gone. Have we taken some of the monitoring points out? And it's not on your map, because if I compare it to the previous year, which is what I have done.
Sorry, I can only talk to this paper.
Have we taken any monitoring sites out?
From last year?
Yeah.
No. From last year, no, we haven't.
We've changed the numbers.
The numbers are only irrelevant to this map.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Scott.
I'll take that up with you.
Yeah, I've seen this report a number of times over the years. That's right. Up to know, you might have to go and ask and have a look at the website as opposed to being presented. But look, to be honest, I think we can do better than this. I know in the previous report, I think it was, the biodiversity, here's the information. This is just the presentation of data. Yeah, that's fine, but the community needs to be able, in this particular instance, you could say the same, but in this particular instance, the community wants to know, basically, are we going forward or are we going backwards? And it seems to me that we need, and obviously there's some commentary. Obviously, there's some commentary around the numbers. Went up, some went down. You compare that to the previous plan of 5 years, some went up, some went down. And then when you look at the table, there's a different number of sampling numbers because we increased the number of state and environment sites. So it's not a straightforward situation. Nevertheless, it seems to me it will probably continue to evolve. We'll probably always be in that space. And as people ring up and they say, how are the rivers? And I say, go and look at the state of the environment. And look at the state of the environment and they go, I don't know. The first thing they say is, what are these different groups? Okay, there's 3 rivers groups and there's 2 lake groups and they relate to Schedule 15 and they have different limits. And Rachel's already said that. But nevertheless, that's not in the information that's presented. and it doesn't assist them to make, sort of that analysis. And then you look at it and, as a layperson, you think, yeah, well, what are the trends? Like, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? We don't know. Are there any conclusions? Are there any catchments in there that should be on notice? What really are the key issues? I know it's in there. Is it nitrogen? Is it sediment? What is it? And then in the end, I'm Joe Average. I've got some land. What can I do differently? Okay.
I need to pull this back because this committee is only about receiving information. It's not about defining what's received or how it's presented.
It's about receiving it, but it's also about understanding it. And we keep getting it. Hands up who understands it. Hands up who thinks it's getting better.
It's not.
Yeah, of course you don't bloody know.
Okay, let's just. Excuse me, Councillor Hobbs, can we just please go to Rachel? And I'm going to keep this in order. So we'll go to Rachel and then we're going to go to Councillor Malcolm. But
what I'd like to
just
make,
please bear in mind the terms of reference of this committee.
What I'd like to make really clear that this is a snapshot. This is looking at data over the last 5 years, full stop. Every 5 years, we do a state of environment report which covers a much larger spectrum, and it covers trends in water quality, which is what you're talking about. And in that report, we look at up to 20 years of data, and then we can talk about trends. We cannot possibly talk about trends if you're looking at this year and last year and the year before. It's just simply not possible. So when we produce the next state of environment report with trends, and when it looks at the MPSFM attributes, and then it looks at the whole gambit, at that point, then you'll get a really good handle on what sites are degrading and what sites are not. But in this instance, all we can do is show you the compliance with the sites that we monitor with the water plan.
And how often do we get that report that you refer to?
Every 5 years. It's an RMA requirement.
Sorry. Thanks, Councillor Scott. I actually had exactly the same question from Gwyneth when we did this, and I had to go and look at things, but I understand that. Councillor Malcolm, Hobbs, Robertson.
Thanks very much for the report. It is very in depth, and I know it is a snapshot. But within it, and if we look at it, we did receive our annual report recently, and now we've got figures here to back it up. So in 2013 to 2018, we had 57% of our rivers were excellent to good. In 15 to 20, we've got 67% of our rivers are good to excellent. So to me, that's not a bad sort of trend. We had in 2013 to 2018, we had 19% of our rivers were poor. We have now. I am trying to interpret it, and I have the right to interpret it.
No.
So please listen.
Okay. That wasn't a criticism.
Right? Yeah.
That wasn't a criticism.
Can we just wait? So we'll finish one conversation.
In 2015 to 2020, 15%, and this is from our reporting that we're getting, 15% of our rivers are now poor. So that is actually a 21% improvement from 2013 to 2020, how I interpret it. We can still, and I agree with Councillor Scott wholeheartedly that we need to continue improving our waters. But in reality, there is a lot of good work that is actually happening. So what we need to do is make sure that we're encouraging the people that are doing that work to actually continue that work. If you look at, and I know it is only a snapshot, but there's actually 38 rivers in this snapshot that are only a skirt away from going up a grade, and some of them going up 1 or 2 grades. Again, I know it's only a snapshot, but if you look at the troublesome rivers, if you look at the Matuki West Wanaka, where the NH4 level is, the recommended is 0.01, it has a level of 0.01. So it's bang on there. It's also got a secondary of NNN at 0.08 and it's 0.075. So we're very close to getting it going from actually poor up to excellent. The Manahira Galloway is similar. It's got E. coli at 267 where the limit's 260. The Manahira the Torrid Allington, very similar at 260 and 289. So I know it is only a snapshot, and I see a trend from 213 to 218. The reality is there is a lot of good work that has not been mandated on people to do, that they're actually out there doing it. So we need to congratulate the people looking after our rivers that things are going along. There's a lot of work to do, but we need to start encouraging them and saying, hey, there's some good work being done. We've got a bit of distance to travel, but keep the good work up. And I thank you for a report. We can always make them better, but yeah, I found it enthralling. Thanks. Yeah.
Rachel, did you have something to add?
I do. Again, I'd like to say that you can't draw trends conclusions from this report ever. It's a snapshot, and when we have a great number of sites changing. So, for example, in 2017, NIWA assessed our state of environment monitoring program, and we added an extra 46 sites or something like that. So to say that in 1 year 17% were poor and the next year 20% were poor, you're not comparing apples with apples. But we will be doing that in the State of Environment report when we can only look at the rivers where we have had a continual long-term monitoring record. So I'd like to see the word trend not used in this context because it's not, it's just a state. And also in this report, because it is meant to be a very short snapshot, where rivers sit compared to Schedule 15, we don't talk about the good work that everybody does and catchment groups and so on, and of course they do. But in this report, it's just purely a data report. So there's no room for acknowledgement really here.
Thank you for that clarification.
Just to follow up that, Madam Chair, is look, I agree 100% with exactly what you said, but the reality is we've got a thing called media, and they will report that as that certainly if the trend was going, what I see as a trend, what I've called a trend at the moment, was going the other way, it would be absolutely jumped on, and perhaps it shouldn't be because it, under your description, but I'm simply saying from those snapshots that we have, we're heading in the right direction.
I think we've had a really good clarification that there is no trend here. It is a snapshot and it's not apples with apples, but we can let that lie as it is. Councillor Hobbs?
With all due respect, I hope that is taken as a positive because we were testing 63 sites. Now we're testing 106 sites, and the snapshot actually shows that a far better conclusion than we were even doing at the 63 sites.
Well, I've just been informed that we shouldn't be interpreting it in that way. But so that's your interpretation.
Often it's quite good to be positive about the world.
Councillor Hobbs?
Yep. In the measurements, there's no macroinvertebrates.
No, because it's purely a water quality report. So in the bigger state of environment report, in the 5-yearly one, we do talk about macroinvertebrates there. They are only monitored once a year.
That you do monitor them once a year?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Not at all of the sites.
Okay. Madam Chair, this is the third report in data and information. So I'm going to ask of you and maybe anybody else, do you consider reading age when you write these reports? I am not being rude, people. If I were to put this out to the equivalent of a year 11, they'd be struggling. Okay? Sorry, this is an English teacher in me. They would be struggling. And they also struggle because they have difficulty reading bloody graphs, and I watch it in this room. So do we ever think about that in any of our reports? Who are we writing it for? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we do.
It's a real issue.
There's a difficulty in creating reports that tell the story, the scientific story, and also
give us the detail.
Easy to understand. And some of that is because we're not dealing with a very easy situation.
Yeah, I totally agree, love.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But I think, I guess I feel for the staff. The bigger context for us is that we're in this really difficult kind of halfway house kind of situation at the moment where we've got parameters that we probably wouldn't necessarily, we wouldn't necessarily be monitoring, but they're in our water plan. So Schedule 15 is in the water plan. We're kind of walking away from some of that policy at the moment, and we're looking towards new policy with fresh water. So we're kind of in this kind of weird halfway house where we've done bits of 6A, we didn't implement the rest of it because we knew it had some problems. we've traditionally done the 5-year state of environment report and then these snapshots. Now, maybe the strategic conversation to have is whether that answers the need for information and data that we have moving forward. So it could be that actually the snapshot thing isn't working for us, and so we need to do something else. We need to look at it in some other way. But we kind of got what we've got for now. I think it'd be useful, and I know Gwyneth is thinking about this, and I know the science team are thinking about this, but to think about what are our data requirements? How do we best tell the story in the future? What are our new requirements under the freshwater NPSFM? But also to be a bit kind of forgiving about the situation we are in, because it's transitional really.
And again, we're just receiving data. Gwyneth?
Just wanted to build on a couple of points Sarah's made. Rachel just whispered into my ear that the new MPSM requires us to report on everything annually, so the report will look quite different next year. But I was going to talk a little bit in terms of Marion, your question around audience age. Reports are written for different audiences. I think historically we've treated this report as a report for technical people. It's not necessarily a report for general communication. We put on our website, it is available for everyone, but it is not an engagement tool. And so that is something we can take on board in terms of thinking about how we present information for different audiences. But it might mean in terms of understanding who accesses the information or whether it is worthwhile us adjusting it to make it useful for a more general audience than, say, a technical audience.
Madam Chair, can I just respond very briefly? Absolutely. I mean, I think I was thinking that myself, and it partly came because something that Kevin said. Kevin said the reporters pick this up and they play a game with it, okay? And I've listened around the room sometimes, and obviously things haven't been completely read. So whereas we would want a technical report, when we want to engage the public, we might write something else.
Yes.
Or ask them if they're going to quote from this, that they talk to one of you people before they quote. In other words, we set out some, and otherwise it just manages, it is managing the message. McLuhan.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, you're all too bloody young. You don't know what I'm talking
Robertson and then Ben Scott.
Yeah, just want to say thanks heaps for bringing this out. It's just so good to have transparent data and in public. So yeah, thank you. I'm not going to attempt to interpret anything here. Just think that in future, if we're going to put something up, it would be good to set out the purpose of this. So the purpose of this report is, if we're going to put this on our website or something, is to present a snapshot of blah, blah, blah. And then the report limitations, I don't know, it might be here, I may not have got it, but sort of like a disclaimer right up front, because people do, by human nature, if you're a farmer in the wherever, gee, there's my catchment, gee, I'm going to dig into these numbers, and you have that disclaimer right up the front, no matter who you are, we all want to do that. So why not say that there are limitations to trying to do that? And then, perhaps we can think in future about how we present it more visually. We used to do report cards, actually, and I don't know if we still do them, but for each catchment there was a report card, 2 sides, and they were great for on the website or taking along to meetings, and then you would know if you're in the Taieri, well, this is what's happening in my catchment. Great, that was awesome. So we can be thinking about that, like you've said. The other thing, though, and sorry, please, this isn't specifically this paper, but does lead on from it in the discussion we're having, is LTP decision making. And just you're looking at those and you see, gee, there's a few rivers here that have got E. coli well above 1,000 or whatever. That's a wee problem, or there's some that have got, So what do we do once we've got this sort of information? I'm sitting here and thinking, what's my responsibility now that I know all this and the LTP's coming up? How am I going to make decisions on where we should invest in terms of monitoring? Because this is just a snapshot, like you say, and it's representative sites across Otago. So when you say 15% of our rivers are blah, it's actually not. It's the sites, because you might have 10 sites on one river and one on another, or whatever, their sites. What would we do if we, say, wanted to find out more about the Kaikorai stream, for example, and actually do something? How are we going to get to that point quickly is what I'm thinking. I don't know if there's a response, and it might be inappropriate in this committee.
Maybe,
I'm not sure it's the full answer, but we are looking at, and we will be presenting to you in the workshop tomorrow around the LTP, around potential specific projects. But I think, as Rachel indicated, this is one source of data that then goes into a decision making around where or not we might invest in terms of both monitoring, but also in terms of action, as you alluded to. I don't know that we will make a decision based on this source of data alone, but hopefully tomorrow when we start talking about the work program from the LTP, you'll start getting a sense of some.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I'll make it very brief. All the replies to the questions, I would, this report, in my view, should be reasonably sort of standalone, so Joe Average can sort of read it and understand. So the disclaimer, as Gretchen said, the disclaimers and so forth, and the explanation in terms of the groups and the different limits, and the fact that there's another report coming out that will actually give maybe a better perspective. Ideally, that's there. So when Joe Public can read it, they don't get trapped into thinking in the wrong way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deaker, and then Hope.
Madam Chair, you've reminded us that the role of the Data and Information Committee is to receive reports like this and not to necessarily debate them, and I'm perfectly happy with that. The previous report on South Dunedin, part of our motion was that it go to Dunedin City Council. Yeah. So clearly this committee has a function in distributing our information to the audiences where we think it will find a good home. It seems to me a very good home for this report would be our newly established catchments group. And would you accept a motion that says not only that this committee notes the report, but forwards it to the Otago Catchment Group, or whatever it's going to be called?
Any concerns with that from the science team?
Rachel's indicated it's on our website, so we're happy to send a link to the catchment groups.
Okay, so I'll move, Madam Chair, this report be noted and be forwarded to the catchment group.
And Councillor Hope will second that. Have you got that, Beavis? Thank you. With that, are there any more questions or comments from anyone before we... Oh, sorry. No, I forgot.
That's all right, don't worry. Don't worry about that. Roseanne and Gwyneth, may I ask you just a question? On page 50 or 55, the very last statement, it talks about Group 4 and Group 5. Now, it says about the fourth sentence down, Lake Waihola was the only small lake to exceed the E. coli limit. And I'm just asking, could you presume, because we know it's a snapshot, that could be bird or it could be anything on that E. coli level? Doesn't always mean it's human, does it? No, I know. And I know it's not because I know the topography is, but I'm just saying to you, and that's another thing I would like to point out, if we're going to put something on the website, that we take very good care to show what it could be. That's just my thoughts, but whether you share that or not, this is your expertise. But I have seen that before where people are rushed into it, oh my God, it's terrible at that lake, and da-da-da-da-da, but it's not the reasoning for the high E. coli.
I think I can understand what you're saying. Yes. I think unless we've source tracked and know for certain, it's a bit of a dangerous practice.
Yes, that's fine, and I just wanted to bring that up. That's why I wanted to ask you, and I appreciate you reply, and that's good. That's fine.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for answering it.
So now I recommend The motions we have on the table is to note the report and to distribute it to the catchment groups.
Yes.
And the amendment is put by, let's deal with the amendment first, put by Dika and Hope. All in favour?
Aye.
Okay, and to note the report, will somebody move and second that? Okay, Hobbs and Hope, lovely. And all in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. It's marvellous to see this data coming into this committee. Thank you very much, Rachel and Gwen.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I didn't think I was putting this is one of them.
Okay, we move on now to 7 point, what is it, 4, the proposed estuary monitoring program. Sam. Welcome to the table.
Sam.
Oh, Sam, hello, Dr. Sam Thomas, coastal scientist. Great to have you with us, thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to implement a state of the environment monitoring network for Otago's estuaries that meet OIC's regulatory requirements. And we are being asked to receive the report, to note the proposal to expand OIC's estuary monitoring program and to create a representative state of the environment monitoring network for estuaries. Welcome, Sam. As soon as you got that up and running, you can get in there. I think you're relatively new to this team too, aren't you, Sam?
Yep. It's 10 months in the job.
Nice.
Well, that's about the same as us.
They're about the same as us. A little bit longer. And have you got your mic on?
2 days and it's a year.
Yeah, 2 days and it's a year.
Yeah, it is too, isn't it?
Yeah, that's on. Lovely.
Cool.
Okay. This isn't your diligent, by the way.
Essentially, this is just talking to the paper you have on the proposed estuary monitoring network. So it's going to be a bit of an overview of kind of the process I've gone about creating the network and how I got to this point. So briefly, as most of you are aware, estuaries are extremely important areas. They have high levels of biodiversity and productivity. They're important nursery areas for commercial fish species, such as down here it's terraki, flounder, rig, for example. And they provide large numbers of ecosystem services, which are things like that stylized diagram is a simplistic of basically the sediment. So you've got the little critters in the top part driving things like oxygen cycling, ammonium denitrification, which essentially removes nitrogen from the system, phosphorus and nitrate cycling. So basically what lives in the sediment is crucial to driving the functions within an estuary. Estuaries are also very culturally important. So because of their location as a receiving environment downstream, they face a lot of threats. These include things such as nutrient inputs, sedimentation, climate change, overfishing, land development, and overharvesting. And so ORC's obligations in relation to estuaries come under the RMA, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, in particular Policy 11, which is around biodiversity to avoid significant adverse effects on estuaries. And the National Policy Statement for Freshwater is to take into account estuaries when setting limits within the freshwater environment as the lowest sensitive receiving environment if they are in that catchment. Also under our regional plan coast, they're classified as coastal protected areas due to their values, which I mentioned previously, and therefore part of it is to avoid significant effects on them under our coastal plan as well. So with these obligations, we need to have a monitoring network to find out what is happening in our estuaries. So currently we monitor 5 out of the 16 estuaries in the region, which isn't representative enough to confidently say if there are adverse significant effects happening across the region due to only 5 being monitored. The current 5 we monitor are the Shag River, Catlins River / lake, depending on which part of the Catlins estuary you're in, the Waikato River, Kaikorai and Tokamara estuary. So part of the monitoring is fine-scale monitoring, which is when a new estuary, basically breaking it down, when a new estuary is put into a network, you do 3 years of fine-scale monitoring, which looks at things like macrofauna in the sediment, sediment nutrients, sediment mud content, and heavy metal content at sites selected within an estuary. So on the right-hand side, you can see, so that's a Catlins River estuary. So site B and site A are the two fine-scale sites. So you often choose upper estuary and a lower one. The other three on there are water quality sites from when this report was done in 2016. But we're currently not doing those, as this was just a one-off snapshot, so that's not occurring anymore. So once the 3-year baseline is done for an estuary, then currently it goes into a cycle of every 5 years, another round of fine-scale monitoring happenings with the same parameters to kind of get a trend over time. Equally, when an estuary comes on board as a new estuary, broad-scale sampling or mapping occurs. So this is essentially going out there with aerial images, going, okay, how much seagrass is there, mud, and then ground truthing it, walking around with basically a GPS to get, so then you get a polygon representation map of percentage of the estuary, which is salt marsh, seagrass, etc. Also set up as sediment plates at the fine scale sites, which is basically tiles from the Mitre 10, which are dug into the sediment, and then you use knitting needles to literally measure the depth of the sediment to where it's buried, and then you go back every year and then put knitting needles back in to see whether there's erosion or deposition of sediment in those sites. And so this is just an example of the sort of output of some of it. So the broad scale monitoring on the left, sorry, it's not that big to see, but that's the Catlins River estuary. So essentially those different colours represent different areas of habitat. So the dark brown content, for example, is very fine mud. The green around the edge is pasture, and the kind of yellowish in the middle is firm sand. I can't quite read the rest myself, but that's sort of essentially what you get from a broad scale report. On the right hand side, this is an example of a fine scale monitoring output, which is the macrofauna monitoring. So we look at taxon richness, which is essentially the species present, the number of species present at each site, and the abundance of species. So this gives an indication of the health of an estuary. More species generally means a healthy estuary, although when you are monitoring from the mouth to the upper part of the estuary, there's a general trend of less species due to the changing environment, and the lower, more well-flushed parts often have a higher amount of species. So essentially, to expand the network to make it more robust and representative to understand what's happening in Otago's estuaries, proposed to add the new estuaries, which is Blueskin Bay, Pleasant River Estuary, Papanui Inlet, Kakanui River, Akatori Creek Estuary, Taotuku and Tohoku River Estuary. So these are chosen basically, some are for reference sites. So a reference site is an estuary which is still kind of pristine, for want of a better word, or as close to natural as could be. For example, the Taotuku Estuary is forested catchment, and we haven't taken monitoring there, but should theoretically be relatively natural state due to its catchment. So these estuaries are then used to compare against other estuaries to see what could be in an estuary if they are degraded. So reference estuaries are good to not only compare estuaries, but in limit setting for FMU, and other estuaries to be brought on to cover a geographic range, as well as potential issues. Like on the right is Pleasant River, which has areas of nuisance algae and sediment, anoxic sediment near the surface, which isn't great for the health of an estuary. So that's sort of how the estuaries were selected geographically for reference, or because when I did a field trip round, spotted basically some issues in the estuary. Another part of the program is to increase the frequency of monitoring. Only the fine scale monitoring, and this will be increased from the current 5 yearly to every 2 years, and this will be done based on the estuarine data. So the 3 year, because we don't have that many years of data, we based on the 3 years of baseline monitoring to see kind of what, if there are issues present, and if we need to monitor more frequently to see if it's a continuation of the trend or if the estuary is stable or is getting worse. So a lot of other councils have already done this or are doing this, for example, Environment Southland, Bay of Plenty. The graphs on the right are kind of a snapshot of how you can make this decision. So the one at the top is the sediment plates. So this is the Catlins River. So the one on the left is all over the show. It's erosion one year, no erosion, then a little bit of erosion. And the one on the right is increasing sediment. And you can see down the bottom, that's percentage gravel, sand and mud. Yeah. So the right-hand side, the brown, dark brown is mud, so it's increasing. So the Catlins River would be one I'd add into 2 years because we don't have enough data. It's hard to know whether this is a trend getting worse or, you know, it might stabilise. We don't have the data to know. So estuaries which are showing issues will be added into a more frequent monitoring schedule. And part of the new program equally is also to add in other factors such as nuisance macroalgae monitoring. So this is mapping the extent of algae such as on the right, which is seagrass, which is in Blueskin Bay. So essentially big areas of this nuisance algae, when it rots, it breaks down and makes the sediment anoxic, which can kill what's beneath it. Also draws oxygen out of the water. So estuary isn't as healthy. So this would be another tool to build into the state of the environment monitoring, and this would be done through ground truthing with a GPS collector FAT walking around as well as aerial imagery. There's also currently work happening at Otago University looking at more efficient ways to monitor macroalgae and estuaries for councils. Another program which will be in is the seagrass monitoring. So seagrass is a good indicator species. It is a sign of a healthy estuary. This picture is from the Catlins River estuary. So seagrass is an important habitat for a variety of species. It actually likes nutrients but doesn't like sediment. So it is vulnerable to increased sedimentation. So in other estuaries around the country, there has been some significant loss in some estuaries. Equally, some estuaries have gained seagrass. So that will be mapped to kind of gauge the health of our seagrass in the Otago regions. And another program will be the shellfish monitoring. So we do take the macrofauna, which does capture what lives there as well as the shellfish, but because they're so important in the sediment, especially cockles and big shellfish, to the functioning of the estuary, we will use quadrats, which get a better representation of what's in the estuary, because you can actually capture more shellfish when you dig it, rather than essentially macrofauna core is about that wide. So when you stick it into the sediment, it doesn't capture the larger creatures as well. So the quadrats will basically add another data layer to what's currently gathered with the macrofauna. And so basically these programs will complement the current data, and some other councils like Bay of Plenty does have extra shellfish monitoring already occurring, as well as seagrass and macroalgae, and Environment Southland equally has started some of these programs. The program will be reviewed every 5 years, and the estuary data will be analysed after each sampling during the summer. So this is to kind of see the trend of what's happening in an estuary, but equally to determine if an estuary needs to be sampled more frequently to predict change, or maybe it is improving, and then we can drop it back to 5 yearly if it's on the improve. And essentially, so from a greater representation of estuaries in the network and adding in programs to the current sampling to build on that data, there'll be a greater ability to detect environmental change. This greater coverage and representation of the estuaries and the data will help to inform decision making. So rather than just saying that estuary is bad and it's bad again and it's bad again, for example, that you can go, okay, what's bad and how do we change it upstream to make it, to improve it. And those programs I've added will develop to build a better picture of the state of the estuarine health to what we currently measure. And essentially why some of those programs are added, because the original, which I think I mentioned in this proposed monitoring program, the original National Estuary Environmental Monitoring Program was designed in 2002. So it is getting built on by other councils to add in more factors to build a bigger picture. as well as also this data will help with the FMU process for the setting limits in the freshwater, knowing actually what's happening in the estuaries, which currently aren't monitored, so we can look at the values in those estuaries and the state of them. Any questions?
Questions? Councillor Wilson, then Robertson.
And I'm just feeling like I might have missed something here, but if I look at the measures that you had right in the first start of the slides, the 4 measurements you were doing, E. coli wasn't one of those, was it?
No.
And the question is, knowing a wee bit, probably a small amount of information is a bad thing, about Blueskin Bay and the issues around their potential for E. coli because of a lot of residential use with septic tanks and very old septic tanks at that. Would it be a factor in some, or at least in some of the estuaries that we should be looking at?
E. coli is probably more an issue around the human health rather than the actual estuarine health as such to what's affecting it, and the shellfish harvesting.
Yeah.
So with Blueskin Bay, the southern clams, they have sampling in that. So if it does go over the limit, they have to stop sampling.
They have to stop taking, I mean.
Stop taking, stop harvesting,
Yeah,
sampling,
yeah.
stop harvesting. Probably the septic tank is more possibly the overflow of the nutrients with it would be more of an issue to the actual estuary condition rather than the E. coli. Like the cockles won't die from it. It's more us eating it. So the health of an estuary from a cultural perspective would be not good, but from the actual functioning, it's not as high an issue on that front.
I suppose if we were, okay, I'm going to ask this, and it's probably a dumb question or put badly. One of the matters that we have had of concern expressed to the person who has to look after regulatory matters is how well septic tanks are working. And one of the places that may be easier to measure is in an estuary, if that's the area, rather than individually testing. I don't know. I mean, we have a responsibility with septic tanks to ensure that they are working, I think.
So that might be a question for Richard, because it's a compliance monitoring. From what I understand, you're asking a compliance monitoring rather than we're trying to understand the health of the estuary, which is what Sam.
Crossover.
Yeah, so the question's been raised around the work we're doing on effectiveness and compliance of septic tanks, and there's a discussion to have if we were to take on that piece of work, which we're not. It's not in our work program at the moment. How would we be able to demonstrate that one way or the other? And estuary monitoring, depending on the location, may be one, but that's not a discussion we've had with science yet.
And it's an interesting point you raise, Kate. Well, actually, for me, that's a very interesting point about E. coli, Sam. So, and
measure it
impact.
everywhere else.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll try and carry on. Anybody else with any questions? Who do I have? Councillor Robertson and then Councillor Moon.
Thank you, and thanks for this report. I'm certainly all for estuary monitoring, really crucial ecosystems, and at the bottom of catchments as well, where often we see the impacts of things upstream. Just small point. My dad wrote those initial guidelines for estuary monitoring and has done most of this monitoring in Otago with other family members, but that's irrelevant. But just in terms of presenting to us and in the future perhaps for us as governors and what we're going to do with these types of reports, we've got a report that's saying we're going to increase the network to 12 sites and we're going to do some monitoring. That's good, but it would be really helpful to know why these sites and why these protocols, because I know you'll have really good reason for them, but it would just really good for us to see that, because 12 sites is a really big investment at a time when, I'm just saying this for learning and for how we're thinking, a big investment for us with the LTP and a lot of other priorities as well. Do we absolutely have to have 12 sites? Could we have 20 sites, if we were going to? So good for us to know, okay, we've got 5 different estuaries of this class. therefore I've chosen 2 of them, but it would be much better to have 4 or 3, or, we don't have any idea the scale of this at all. Like, you're going to be monitoring everything based on the national protocol, and that's really good, tick, or we're not going to be doing that. Yeah.
Gwyneth may be able to clarify this
So
first.
I can probably answer, because I think there's 2 parts to that question. One is understanding why we've picked 9 sites as a representative sample, and maybe Sam can explain in a bit more detail around why those 9 sites. The other part of what I heard from that was a budgeting conversation and a decision around investment. So this is, as I said, it's a receiving information committee. This summer's budget is well within my delegation, and I'm making a decision that I think we should do this summer's reporting. Obviously, from next year on, we have an LTP, and we will build this program into the LTP. Should you choose to change, the monitoring program, whether it's estuaries or any other monitoring program that we have as a prioritisation, then that's something that we can consider as the ongoing as part of the LTP. I will say that Sam is, I think, being very clever and smart about how he thinks about going this monitoring program. We're investing in this summer and using consultants as we have for the last number of years, but this year we will have staff going out with those consultants and training on how to do this monitoring, and from next year on it will be in-house, and so it will not be external cost. It will be, there's some cost in FTEs that we've already brought on board. I should say the exception to that, it will be some project-specific ID and consultancy work, but that broad scale is part of that.
Thank you. Thank you much, Councillor Noon, and then Councillor Malcolm.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a question regarding meeting the requirements of the MPS FM. What you've presented today, does that get us over the line? Does it get us over the line and a bit more, or is it the bare minimum?
Well, the NPSFM requires to take into account the sensitive receiving environment for setting freshwater limits. It doesn't say to set limits for estuaries. It's sort of, we can do that like other councils are, but we don't really know what's happening in the estuaries to help the freshwater team set the limits currently. And enough estuaries in each region. In terms of the bare minimum, there's no real guidance on the estuary side of it. That's more selected based on having reference sites, so we can use as like a natural state as part of it to refer to. So 3 of those estuaries are for natural state, and the others are more that they are currently impacted. Like we have like Pleasant River, for example, has some rather large areas of gross eutrophic zones, which is essentially nuisance algae, soft mud, which things don't grow. So to see, is it getting worse, and how can we fix that estuary? So yeah, it's to provide the information to help the freshwater team, and to kind of go like how Southland does a little bit, where they are setting attributes for estuaries in Southland to manage it from the mountains to the sea. Yep. Because we can't really manage the estuary without the catchment, so we kind of need to link it in.
Okay. Can I just follow up another? It relates to the Pleasant River. You mentioned, some issues there. Are you aware of the history with that that photograph shows what was a stock feeding pad that was, there'd been a barrier built to keep the sea out for 30 or 40 years or whatever, and through a resource consent process, the developer opened it back up so the sea could come in and out, etc. Are you aware of the history there? Because it's got some issues that probably relate to its previous use, maybe, but I just wanted to ask that.
No, not aware of the history. I sort of more when I did the field work and saw the issues and thought, well, we probably should find out what's happening there. Part of that is possibly looking at sediment source tracking or that to find out where the sediments come from in the catchment. But
there might be a quick answer to that question over here.
Yeah, no, I can share some information with you and put you onto someone at the DCC that could give you all that history, which may be useful to have. So, thank you.
Can I just supplementary to that ask that in terms of, does this take us, is it bare minimum in terms of the coastal policy statement obligations, or are we above bare minimum?
Can I ask that question?
I mean, it's kind of the grey area, the estuary.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to give you a lay person's answer to this and then Sam might. This is estuary monitoring, it is not coastal monitoring. So it doesn't cover the full gamut of the coast. That is still in terms of developing up that monitoring program, that's still a work in progress. The focus on the estuary program was because of its importance as the highest sensitive receiving bite under the FMU process, and therefore we know we need to get off the starting blocks faster because it's got to inform the land and water plan.
Okay, thanks. So now we've got Councillor Malcolm and then Councillor Scott. Oh, Sam's got something else to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's sort of, I don't know if you read the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment report on estuaries or the brief, but essentially estuaries are kind of been falling in the grey zone a lot. It's sort of between the coastal policy statement and land, and there's talk of integrated management. There's no set, like freshwater, there's no set out bare minimum, so that's the difficulty. I mean, some, like for example, Southland, because I did half my PhD down there, I know that they've got data on every estuary. They don't necessarily monitor them all the time, but they know about, and a lot of other councils do. So it's really hard to say a bare minimum when there isn't, and then the kind of requirements set out. You must monitor 60% of your estuaries, for example. It's kind of to try and get a represented enough coverage, both in the geographic region and also the type kind of estuary, to confidently kind of say what's happening in the estuaries, I suppose, is how it would be, and to also equally manage the new integrated management. You kind of know what's happening downstream to manage what's happening on land.
Thank you. Councillor, we're up to Malcolm Scott. Oh, Malcolm.
Yeah. Just a quick, Tomahawk Lagoon, where does that fit in?
Good question.
Oh.
Is it an estuary?
Well,
I roughly know where it is.
Yeah. I mean, Tomahawk Lagoon, there's kind of, lagoons are sort of an interesting one. They sort of technically fall under estuaries, as in the tend to intimately closed and open lagoons. And then there's the shallow intertidal dominated estuary, which is what you see in the picture, which is most of ours. Then there's riverine dominated estuaries, and then deep ones, which are kind of like the fjords. So the lagoons are probably going to be tackled in a different, sort of under a different program, because they don't have the same monitoring or like protocol as estuaries, because they're sort of a completely different environment, even though technically they are estuaries.
So you've just said something.
Hang on, we'll just keep the program. Councillor Scott and then Hobbs.
Yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled that we're potentially doing more monitoring of estuaries. We've been talking about this for years, and with the biodiversity presentation earlier today, where all of a sudden we're getting more information what's going on in the sea, and this is the interface between the rivers and the sea, and we're talking about mountains to the sea. And my question is just as a matter of interest in relation to the recommendation where it says create a representative SOE monitoring network for estuaries. So there's 16 estuaries, yeah? And we're proposing to do 12, are we?
Yep.
And how do we know that we've got a representative monitoring network as a matter of interest? How do we know that?
Probably a review in 5 years' time should hopefully let us know whether we've covered that as representative. I mean, it's very hard to completely say without having the data or looking at it across the region.
Yeah.
And also when there's no direct governance of how many estuaries out of your amount of estuaries you have.
But I assume that when you set up that representative, that you actually, there's different types of estuaries, and that for example, you talked about the one in the Catlins representing a pristine, and you've got a touchy-feely representative.
Wow. Wait a second. Can I just? We've got a person here with a PhD, right? And he's advising that I guess the first point is to monitor these 12 estuaries, and we're going to review it in 5 years' time to confirm whether or not with that monitoring we have representative data.
Thank you very much. Let's move on. Councillor Hobbs.
Just a quick one. Did I hear you say a fjord was an estuary?
Yeah.
Yeah, technically it's kind of an estuarine system.
Is a harbour an estuary then?
Like Otago Harbour?
Yeah.
There's estuarine parts to it.
Yeah. There definitely are, because I look at them. Yeah.
So the harbour's
The bits that people play cricket on in the summer.
No, that's bank.
No.
No.
It's right in the middle.
Used to be a golf course down there as well.
Councillor Callaghan, sorry.
Sorry, one question, it may be sort of stepping back into the last question that got a wee bit of mirth, but the if we're doing 12, why not do 16? Is it purely a cost issue?
Yeah, well, why don't do 6?
To a bang for buck.
Yeah.
Bang for buck conversation. We could do 12. We could, just like we could do more monitoring at all sites across all attributes across all of Otago, but I guess the advice we're putting forward is that the representative, to get a good picture, the representative number to do is 12.
Okay, just 12 is so close to 16, and I just wonder, would we get a better...
If you add another 4.
If you want to propose that as part of the LTP.
Per estuary.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's another 100 grand.
But are we making a saving by moving to staff versus
We
consultants?
very much are making a saving by moving to staff.
We are, but those staff could be doing other things as well. So it's all about prioritisation of opportunity costs and prioritisation. So.
Okay, I think my question's answered. Thank you.
It's worth thinking about, isn't it? Thank you
if you want to.
very, very much for that report. I found it really super informative.
Do you have to pass anything?
What's that? We have to put it.
Oh, do we
Now
do?
we're going to receive it and note the proposal to expand it.
Aye.
Okay, we'll have Councillor Wilson, Councillor Hobbs, and those in favour? Aye.
Those against?
Those against?
Carried.
Carried.
You just weren't
Thank you very
just weren't
much.
accepting me, were you?
I really enjoyed that, and thank you. I'd just like to say thank you to, excuse me, everybody, just while we're at it before we go, I'd like to say thank you very much to Gwyneth, to Gavin, to your staff, and to Sarah for getting this information committee up and running, because it's going to be really useful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're happy to start at 3, if the staff are here,